everything is referenced, generally speaking, at nigelpoulton.com.
Cool, including the Klingon versions. So Nigel, let's move on to some of the training courses that you provide. What's the kind of, who are the courses aimed at? Can you give us an idea of that?
Yeah, so I've got two sort of major offerings when it comes to training like that. So I've got the on-demand stuff online that you can go to now and get a subscription to, or purchase that and watch it right now. Mm-hmm. And most of my stuff there is on pluralsight.com. But if you go to nigelpoulton.com, it's all listed on there. Right. Then there's the other element that is like the live streams that I do at the moment. Those used to be face-to-face events, which, to be honest, I kind of prefer, but the live streams, we're kind of getting good at them now, and they're fun as well. Yeah. So there's those two elements. Now, if you go to the pre-recorded video trainings, you know, I've got quite a lot of stuff up there, sort of starting at the, excuse me, starting with the simple stuff like, I don't even really know what a container is, you know, all the way through to let's get down into the weeds and the internals of Docker and of Kubernetes and things like that. And then you can work your path out, you know, just step through. I only need to be good enough to cover myself with a conversation at the coffee machine, or actually when things go, when the brown stuff hits the fan in production, I need to know how to fix it. That's more down in the weeds. So I've got all of that kind of stuff, and feedback to that's been really good. So I recommend that people usually watch my videos back at like at least 1.2 speed, usually 1.4 speed, so that you get through it a bit quicker. You don't have to listen to me for so long. But it tends to be a good speed for people to watch at. Right. And they're a lot of fun, don't get me wrong. Again, the passion that I have for doing this comes across really well in the videos. Yeah. In fact, it's the videos most of the time where people say, I feel like I know you now. Like, I feel like we were just sat in a bar just talking about it. It was really laid back, and I really appreciated and liked your style. Then there's the in-person stuff that we're doing now. So the in-person stuff, sorry, the live stream stuff that we're doing, because we can't do the in-person. And those are more targeted towards organizations. We do them for like meetups and things, don't get me wrong, but like, it's not really for the individual. If you're an individual on your own wanting to learn, you go watch my pre-recorded videos on my YouTube channel. But for like the in-depth stuff, it's my pre-recorded videos on Pluralsight usually. If you're an organization and you want to train a team or your wider tech group, and we do a lot of these at the moment to the entire technology group within large organizations, we come on and we take an hour slot usually, because people don't like to concentrate for more than an hour. And we say, like, I'll do 45 minutes of presentation, and it can be intro to containers, intro to Kubernetes. It can be on a more advanced topic. We did one not so long ago, specializing in one particular flavor of a hosted Kubernetes. But we take about 40 minutes, and right at the front of those, we're like, look, ask as many questions as possible. Let's make this interactive. I'll call your name out when we read your questions. I'll do my best to answer them. We'll give a prize away at the end for the 2 best questions or whatever. And then at the end of the 40 minutes, it's fully open to like a free-for-all Q&A, and we just engage in that way. And we've had so much positive feedback over the last few months, delivering these remotely to organizations that are thinking about deploying Kubernetes or have started it, but it's only a handful of people, and they want the wider community within there, or their wider tech community within the organization, to like get their heads around something. They've really loved that, and our approach to doing that, in making it as laid back and as light-hearted and as interactive as possible. Because at first, like when we first started doing these live streams, they were good, don't get me wrong, but I really missed being able to eyeball people. And an important part of eyeballing people is like, you can read an audience. Like, if I've not explained something well, you can start to see people switching off, which is a bad thing. And I need to go back and say, right, look, maybe I should just go through this again. Whereas we struggled with that at first with the live streams, but now that we've got this thing down at the beginning about the question and answers, you know, we always say this is a safe place, right? There are no embarrassing questions. The bravest person on the event is the one that asks the most questions. Yeah. Never be embarrassed or shy to ask a question. It's not a silly question, in the same way that I'm not going to be embarrassed or shy if I don't know the answer. Yeah. I'll hold my hand up and say, I don't know the answer to that. As long as you're willing to put your hand up and say, I don't understand that. Because if you don't understand it, you'll never be the only one on the live stream. There'll be a handful of other people that don't understand it either. And you're doing everyone a favor. So we're really strong about that at the beginning of them. And what that engenders is like, as good as possible, not being there in person, like feeling like you're making that connection. And it's like you're reaching as many people as possible. And look, I'll be honest, we have fun doing the live streams now. And I never thought that I would say that, because at first they were kind of a bind. And other people will be good at them now, don't get me wrong, but we just are pretty good at them now. And when I say we, in the business, it's myself and my brother. I do all the technical stuff and the delivery. He does all of the organization in the background and sets things up and manages my calendar and all that stuff, because I'm just like head in the ground. What have I got on the calendar today? Oh yeah, we're delivering this live stream today, or on this podcast today. And I just come in and deliver the goods, and he does all the hard work in the background. Right. We're kind of good at it now, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw, I think, the one that you did for the Plural Site stream, I think back in the summer, and you certainly mentioned all of that stuff about, you know, sort of no question is a silly question, and so on on that. So I think that's quite good, and I think that would probably appeal to a wider audience. And there's so much of a shift in terms of not just the technology these days, but also the titles and what people are expected to do in their roles. You know, you've got things like SREs and SEs and Ops and, you know, solution architects, cloud architects, and so on. So I think, you know, the broader kind of the approach is, and the more that you can encompass, the more kind of people that you can actually probably, you know, be appealing to in terms of, you know, what you're delivering.
For sure.
Clearly, Kubernetes is kind of at a, you know, at a sort of a, you know, mature, you know, sort of stage. It's certainly in a lot of production environments. But I just kind of wanted to ask you about generally how you're seeing the shift, you know, from for organizations from, you know, the data center into the cloud, and what's the picture there?
Yeah, so I think with more traditional enterprises, you know, the organizations that tend to be more risk averse and slower to adopt new technologies and change, they've somewhat in the past been hamstrung in their ability, or held back in their ability to deploy to Kubernetes, while they've waited for some of the elements of Kubernetes to mature, and even not just to mature, but to become present. So I think, like, look, this always happens, right? It happened with virtual machines, containers, and now Kubernetes. That we did like the stateless workloads first, that the low-hanging fruit, for want of a better term. We would pick like your stateless front-end web servers. They're dead easy to spin up as a container and run in Kubernetes, right? But most applications, certainly in an enterprise, and most line of business critical type applications, have a persistent element to it. Like they store, they generate, store, and manage stateful data. And look, when VMware first came out, it did compute really well. And then it started to take on networking. And then last of all, almost, came storage, persistent data. We saw a similar thing with containers, and certainly with Kubernetes. And I think, so this last year, 2020, I know it's been a very challenging year in general, okay? But focusing on Kubernetes technology, it's been a massively important year in the maturity of the container storage interface, the CSI, and the ability to take, if you're an enterprise, take your, and I don't like to name drop, okay, but like take your NetApps and your Pure Storage and your EMC, battle-hardened enterprise-grade storage systems that you already trust your business critical data to, plug them into Kubernetes via the CSI, and have their resources available to the applications running on Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Now, without that, and we've only really just got to a good place towards the end of 2020 there. Without that, a lot of enterprises are like, well, I can't put my enterprise applications on containers on Kubernetes in the cloud, or even on my on-premises data center, because that persistent storage element that I trust, and let's remember, if your storage goes down or you lose it, you lose customers, people lose jobs, and you potentially go out of business. It's not like the network going down and when it comes back up, everything's all good. Like if you corrupt or lose data, hello. So while that has been missing, I think enterprises have been like, you know, we've got our eye on Kubernetes and what have you, but we can't deploy to it in any aggressive manner yet. Well, CSI is mature now, and most of the data management companies, your EMCs, your Pure Storages, your NetApps, your Commvaults, your people like that, are bringing their A game and are bringing their, you know, enterprise-grade storage systems, plus their data management capabilities, the ability to replicate data, to snapshot it, to migrate data and applications to the Kubernetes party, meaning that enterprises have a much more rounded solution that they can build with Kubernetes. Don't get me wrong, we've still got a ways to go, but I think we've now got good networking. Everything can get easier, right? But we've got decent security, that can certainly get a bit easier, but we've also got decent storage as well. Yeah. And I think that means that enterprises can more confidently deploy.
So Nigel, the other thing I wanted to ask in sort of the state of play for Kubernetes was around cloud native in general. How are you seeing sort of organizations in adopting that? Obviously, we've seen a lot of sort of acceleration of things like, you know, digital transformation this year, thanks to COVID and stuff like that. But what's kind of your take on that?
Yeah, so let me just give my definition of cloud native just to sort of frame my answer, okay? Yeah. So when I'm talking about cloud native here, now I'm going to say applications deployed to Kubernetes that are written as microservices apps, so not monoliths. So every feature of the application is coded independently, and they communicate with each other, and they can self-heal and scale and stuff like that. That's my view of cloud native here. That kind of application running on Kubernetes that will run anywhere. Now, I think that like smaller, more modern companies, I hate to use the term, but born in the cloud companies, you know, that have never had their own on-premises data center infrastructure, they've got the staff, both from a technical perspective and like a leadership perspective, to be more aggressive at just, you know, going with something that's new. So I find these smaller sort of born in the cloud organizations are really good at it. And don't get me wrong, they've been burned and they've learned their lessons, but they don't have a core on-premises infrastructure to fall back on. So they had to make it work. And they're kind of the vanguard leading the way. Within larger, more traditional organizations, I'm seeing a massive appetite for it, but they haven't been able to in the past for quite a lot of reasons. And one of them we just talked about was the missing storage component. Yeah. But then the ability to have a support contract behind their Kubernetes environment, whether it's on-premises or hosted, from one of their trusted enterprise partners, Red Hat, IBM, HPE, Microsoft, people like that, yeah? But now that we've got the storage, now that we've got these kind of major players, you know, supporting Kubernetes, the floodgates are almost open, but they have to be super careful how they deploy. And what I'm seeing most people do, and they did this with Docker in the early days, and actually in my own experience, we did it with virtual machines as well, is that you carefully select potentially some new applications or some applications that are not so core to the business. Yeah. Start testing the water with, and you pick a handful of people within the organization that are sort of like living on the bleeding edge and have got an appetite for taking on something new. And you get them as a brain trust, basically, or a SWAT team or whatever, to deploy an application and figure it out, and then deploy a second one and start documenting it and bring in a couple of other people and work out, right, how will the rest of the organization be able to consume this in a simpler way? How will we get it to the wider teams? and then just it organically then grows from there with those like experts that have done a few applications, then going and mentoring and putting together, you know, the ability for people to pick from a shelf almost, and deploy a new application to this infrastructure. So I think from an enterprise and a more traditional organization perspective, they're starting to do it slowly, but I really do feel like that once they get a taste for it, and I'm seeing some evidence of this already actually, they're really keen to push it into the wider organization, because once you can see the benefits of being able to roll updates to applications almost any time that you want, and it not be like we've got to plan it 3 months in advance for this long holiday weekend, all hands on deck all weekend, we're buying pizzas for everybody. It's really squeaky bum nervous time to being able to like, well, we can push updates almost any time we want. We can push updates to subsets of the application and test. We can roll them back easily. If part of the application fails, Kubernetes can kind of fix it for us. If demand goes up, we don't need a human to press a button to scale it. Stuff like that becomes addictive. And I think that once organizations get a trust in it, and they've got their partners alongside, sort of holding their hand and knowing if it goes wrong, they can pick up the phone effectively, we'll see much more rapid adoption, because that cloud native stuff that I talked about, Kubernetes and self-healing and scaling and stuff, like, I know it's corny, but who doesn't want that, if you know what I mean? Like, as long as it's easy and consumable, why wouldn't you do it? You wouldn't choose to do it the old way, unless like the new way was too risky, and it's just getting less risky the way I see the world.
Yeah, and certainly you mentioned kind of, you know, getting going, those sort of initial sort of tiger themes, so to speak, is certainly one way. One other sort of in my other pursuits, I'm also sort of advocating, you know, cloud centers of excellence as well for the larger organizations. And I've had some conversations, and I think we've just done a blog on that as well. I think that's certainly all helpful for those sort of more established, you know, enterprises. As you said, the sort of the born in the cloud companies, you know, can sort of you know, just start with a you know, blank slate really, and kind of go from there. So one of the other things that kind of happened recently was the you know, the focus with the latest release of Kubernetes on the container runtime interface, so the CRI, and there just seems to be a little bit of either confusion or something around Docker as a runtime, or Docker shim kind of being removed from that. So just kind of talk to that briefly.
Yeah, so I think, look, we've always known that this was going to happen, that at some point, full-blown or full-fat Docker, it wasn't a perfect fit for Kubernetes. It did what Kubernetes needed it to do, but it also had a load more baggage that it did a lot of other things that Kubernetes was like, I already do that myself, or I don't need you to do it. So there was always a long-term plan that Containerd or some of the other container runtimes that leverage the CRI, Cryo and others, gvisor, whatever, Kata containers, would become more prevalent, and that there'd be like a waning almost of Docker, like full-fat Docker. And that's been on the cards for a while. And I know that like GKE, probably for months now, you've been able to, on the advanced options, say, run my cluster with Containerd instead of Docker. And I've been doing that for a long time. So I feel like it was always the end goal to get to more slimline container runtimes that just do what Kubernetes needs, and also more specialized ones like, you know, if you need better workload isolation, Docker and Containerd might not be the right container runtime. Pick the one that's right from you, because we've got the CRI that lets you pick and choose your runtime effectively. So not a problem for me. Also in the fact that I feel like for most people, and everybody should always do their own testing, of course, especially for production applications, but I feel very much like it's very low level plumbing that like most people might not even notice. Like Containerd, look, let's be square about this. Docker, full-fat Docker, already has done for a long time, use Containerd to start and stop containers, or to manage run C, whatever, right? To do its low-level functions. So obviously then any container images that you package with Docker, they're going to work with Containerd because Docker's already been using Containerd for ages.
Correct.
So I won't say all, there may be examples, but the vast majority of your existing packaged applications as containers are going to run just as well on Kubernetes with Containerd as it did with Kubernetes with Docker. And it's the right step going forward. Don't get me wrong, like having this bloated runtime versus a cut down, more focused one. We always want the cut down, more focused one.
Yeah. Well, Nigel, I appreciate your time today. It's been a really great talk. Lots of really interesting stuff. So just again for reference, people can certainly get your book from all these sort of usual outlets. All the material is on nigelpoulton.com. Is that correct? And kind of people can go there first and sort of jump from there to the right places.
Yeah, that's right. So all of the material is at least referenced on nigelpoulton.com, and it'll send you to the relevant places, like the book. If you want the book, if you want the paperback, it'll send you to Amazon. If you want different electronic versions, it'll send you to different places where you can get them. But everything is referenced, generally speaking, at nigelpoulton.com.
Cool, including the Klingon versions.
Absolutely, most definitely.
Especially those ones. Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Thank you. Well, Nigel, thank you very much for your time. It's been really fantastic. I've enjoyed it. I learned so much as well. I just thank you for your time and wish you much continued success. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I really appreciate you having me on. Cheers.
Thank you for watching this talk. If you enjoyed the content, please comment, share, like, and subscribe. See you next time.